everyone, I'm Lily Peterson.
And I'm Paul Wilson. Welcome to Beyond Benefits with Benefits Pro. In this episode, we're talking to Solome Tibebu, founder and CEO of Behavioral Health Tech. But first, let's take a few minutes to catch up with my co-host, Lily. Hey, Lily, how's your summer going so far?
Paul, I'm so glad you asked. I'm very excited to share that I have nothing going on this summer.
I don't believe that. I follow you on Instagram, and I feel like you're always up to something.
Well, May was the busiest month ever for whatever reason. I guess I have one thing on my calendar. I'm going to the Coldplay concert next week in Denver.
Oh, nice.
So I'm super excited about that. But that's literally the only thing on my calendar in June, and I'm so excited. What about you?
That's quite a departure for you because usually I feel like you are always doing something. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot going this summer. We're doing a lot of things around town, like local things. I think I mentioned in our last episode that we've been going to a couple plays recently here in Denver where we have a really good theater scene. And then last weekend, you'll appreciate this, Lily, we went to a festival here in Denver that was, how do you like this pairing? Whiskey and donuts.
I went to that 2 years ago and it
Did
was
you really?
amazing. Yes. Did you like it?
Oh, I loved it. What's not to love? If anything, I guess I wouldn't have minded a little more savory. It was a very
Yeah.
sweet experience, but I mean, the whiskey, I guess, kind of either counterbalanced the sweet or kind of numbed my taste buds enough that I was able to deal with it. But no, but it was absolutely amazing. It was, I don't know how many different vendors there were, but there were all kinds of donut
There's a
makers from
lot.
around town. Yeah, all kinds of whiskey and bourbon distributors. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
that was so fun. Such a fun experience.
Was it in the same area in like downtown, like Auraria? Is that what it's called?
And Rhino, for those who know Denver
Oh,
and
that
have
one
some
was in
idea.
Rhino. Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, it's just been fun to kind of explore. I've heard people talk about this, and I've experienced this too. Sometimes when you go to a different city, you do all these fun things, and you go explore all the things there are to do. But sometimes in your own city, you don't take full advantage, and so we've been
Yeah.
trying to slowly remedy that a little bit. So yeah, that's been fun.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited for all the farmers markets that are gonna starting up. The one right below my apartment, it's amazing. There's this guy who cooks fresh baked bread from his house and it's so delicious.
Mm.
Like a French baguette or sourdough. So I'm excited that that starts and like has started. And the Pearl Street one is super nice.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of Boulder, I mean, I probably mentioned Boulder once every other episode or so, but yeah, we're looking forward. That's something we do every summer. Our sons, for years now, have been part of this orchestra camp that takes place up at the CU campus in Boulder. And not that we need an excuse to go up there, but that gives us a reason when we drop them off. We'll usually spend some time on Pearl Street, hit the Boulder bookstore, lots of our favorite places to eat and drink around town. So yeah, that'll be fun too. But yeah, it's so nice to just kind of explore your own state and get a little bit of time in the summer to just enjoy where we live, which is a beautiful place.
Yeah, I'm also excited that I guess it's rainy this week, but I'm excited that it will finally be consistently nice, hopefully.
Yeah,
Maybe a little less rainy, but
I know.
yeah,
Although, as a Colorado native, I will always welcome the rain because,
we need it.
yeah, we don't get much. We don't get much. See, you're starting to sound like an old person now. We need some
I feel
moisture.
like I have always sounded like an old person.
Nice. Well, today's episode with Salome is going to focus a lot on behavioral health and mental health. And you and I both, spend a fair amount of our time reading and writing about that space. And so I thought maybe we could just kind of set the stage a little bit here with a few stats about where things stand right now. So for one thing, there's been a big awakening, over the past few years. And I think some of the stigma around mental health and behavioral health has started to go away a little bit. But I still wonder sometimes if we truly understand, how prevalent these issues are. So I came across this stat from the National Institute of Mental Health that says it's estimated that 1 in 5 adults live with a mental illness. I mean, it's prevalent, but 1 in 5, that's amazing.
Yeah, I think it sounds very crazy to hear, but when you really think about it, the conversations you have with your friends or coworkers or family, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, it's true. Especially when you start considering, things like anxiety and some of the other things that would technically apply. Now, it does
Yeah.
make sense, but I think it just spells out how important this is and why it's so nice that some of the stigma has started to slowly disappear. I mean, we talk about that
Yeah.
with Salome today, that there's still a long way to go, but it is exciting to see that there's starting to be some progress. And I think a lot of that does have to do with some of the stats and studies like we're discussing here, just kind of exposing it for people and making them realize that even if you don't have to deal with this personally, somebody absolutely does.
Yeah, and I spend a lot of time focusing on HR and employers, and I've realized that mental wellness and mental health has a really big impact on the workplace. I even find myself when I'm struggling with a mental health day that it does affect how much work I can get done, the quality of work I can get done,
Right.
that kind of stuff. And I think, from what I've read and listened to, that a lot of employers are ready to listen and understand their employees and what they need from their employers, basically. We talk a lot
Hmm.
about healthcare benefits, and mental health is part of that. I think employers are ready to see their employee as a whole person and talk about whole person wellness, which includes emotional, financial, physical wellness. And a stat I actually ran across was that, well, I think employees are especially concerned, about financial anxieties, especially tariffs, inflation, wages not matching inflation, all that fun stuff. But one of the stats I ran across was, according to Included Health, 71% of Gen Z, 68% of millennials, and 69% of Gen X report experiencing anxiety over finances.
Yeah, no, that is a really important piece. Like you said, it's one of those things where I think for a long time, those areas were siloed off, financial, emotional, and physical wellness were talked about separately. But I really do agree with you that the trend lately has been realistically looking at people as a whole employee and realizing, like you said, if somebody's distracted or having a hard day, whether it's financial or emotional or whatever the case may be, it's going to impact them. So, yeah, those are really big numbers, but it's not surprising. And like you said, especially given everything going on right now in the world, financial anxiety is a real thing. I have two sons who are, one's a teenager and one's just turned 20, and I know that just the whole idea of living paycheck to paycheck and struggling, I mean, that can impact people well beyond those ages, but it's something that employees of all ages are really dealing with right now. So yeah,
Yeah.
that is a really eye-opening stat. Building on that, we'll throw out one more group of stats here before we kick things off. According to Wonder Health, human connection, physical well-being, and emotional well-being were some of the top priorities when it came to happiness in 2024. And I think that's interesting too. It's another thing that I know employers are challenged with right now is increasingly many workplaces are either hybrid or remote. And so you have that human connection thing going on. And then, just trying to figure out ways to encourage your employees to, go to the gym or to go take a walk at lunch or to do
Yeah.
those, mental health breaks during the day. I mean, it's all just so closely tied together. And so like I said, I'm encouraged having covered this industry now for years. I do think that there has been some progress made, but obviously there's so much still to go. And again, as we turn it over here in a minute and start talking to Solome, that's one of the things that she and the company she works that she founded, that they do such a nice job of, is providing some great tips and technologies to make that happen.
With my mental health struggles, it was very scary at first and no one understood. And it's crazy to see, what has happened in the last 10 years. And I really appreciate seeing someone like Salome fight that fight to be understood, to be heard, to make it a normal thing. Cause I feel like for my parents' generation, it was just like, oh, there's four emotions and it's anger, sadness, happiness, and whatever, And so I just feel like this has brought awareness, and I don't know. I appreciate seeing people fighting that fight and fighting to be heard.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as people will recognize as they listen to this interview, Solome speaks from very personal experience. And the journey hasn't always been easy for her. And she's had to overcome some of that to kind of be in this position of leadership. But as I say during our conversation, I mean, I am just completely blown away by her poise, by her ability to innovate and to lead. And so I think that people, as they listen to this interview, will get a great snippet of exactly everything that she stands for. So yeah, we should move on to our interview with Solome Tibebu, founder and CEO of Behavioral Health Tech. And like we said, in this episode, we talk about everything from the current state of behavioral health in the US to Solome's personal mental health journey, to her work at Behavioral Health Tech and their mission to expand access to mental health, addiction, autism, and IDD services. And we also talk about everything from mental health in the workplace to the key role that technology and benefits innovation can play. We'd also go off on some interesting tangents. We talk about everything from overcoming stage fright to the impossible art of keeping houseplants alive, and much, much more.
Joining us today is Solome Tibebu. Welcome to Beyond Benefits. We're so happy that you're here. So, how are things going in your world? I feel like everything's so crazy all the time.
Thanks so much, Lily. I'm thrilled to be here. And yes, interesting times to say the least. There's a lot happening in the world, but also in behavioral health, and excited to share more.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit about your company, the conference, and what you do on a day to day basis?
Yes, I'm the CEO and founder of Behavioral Health Tech, which is the largest community focused on expanding access to behavioral health, which we define as mental health, addiction care, autism and IDD services, particularly through technology, health equity, and innovation. And we do that in many ways throughout the year, but that is mostly taking place through our annual event in the fall.
Yeah, speaking of that event, I'm a big fan of it, and I've been lucky enough to be able to attend. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I was lucky enough to chat with you and a couple of other industry leaders on stage last year at our Benefits Pro Broker Expo. And when I asked you, what made you decide to dedicate your career to mental and behavioral health, you said that in some ways you thought the career path had actually kind of found you. Can you talk a little bit about that, your personal experiences and how all of that has kind of shaped your career and your passion for this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So I struggled a lot with anxiety, OCD as an adolescent, and so much so that I was the kind of teen that was going to the local Barnes and Nobles to read as much as I could about anxiety, panic attacks, obsessive compulsive disorders to cope with what I was experiencing. And at the time, I thought, why can't teens like me everywhere have access to this kind of information? And especially to be able to know that I wasn't completely alone, which was definitely the case. The intrusive thoughts and compulsions, it was just so isolating and embarrassing, especially growing up in a household where my parents are immigrants, half Polish, half Ethiopian. You can imagine we weren't really talking about mental health at home, which only brought on more challenges. And so I was motivated by that. And so in 2006, when I was 16, I started anxietyinteens.com as one of the first 14 by teen online resources for other young people like myself to connect and know that they weren't alone and share their stories. And so I continued that nonprofit for about 10 years. And it was really my first foray into all things mental health, tech, entrepreneurship. And here I am, all these years later, still very much focused on the same mission of expanding access to mental health for all, particularly through technology.
Yeah, I love how you took something like that was a challenge and turned it into such an empowering thing for so many people. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about the process of, starting out where you were with some of those struggles? I mean, I imagine it was probably quite a tough decision to kind of launch that startup. In the early days, I assume with any startup, there's a lot of challenges, but like, how did you kind of progress as you started to get more comfortable in that space?
Yeah, I remember it just started with a very janky geosites, upgraded to like a Yahoo business page at some point, called my cousin Kelly to help me set up a Joomla site. Step by step, things were improving. Surprisingly, I didn't have as much anxiety around sharing my story. I just knew that, at least by that point, how common mental health conditions were for youth and adults. Unfortunately, still today, it's more than 1 in 5 young people struggling with a mental health condition. And so I knew at least by then somebody was going to resonate with my story and I would be able to connect with them. And so thankfully, that portion wasn't as hard. And of course, the more I told my story, the more that was absolutely the case. And over the years, other college students, some of their parents also contributed to the site. And it really just fortified my desire to continue in this space. And so I, after school, continued and launched my own mental health tech app. I worked for a large behavioral health software company. eventually worked at a few venture funds investing in digital health. And then eventually that led to my work leading a philanthropic fund funding over 100 youth mental health nonprofits during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, when I was at your conference last year, you had a session where there were some, young people up on stage who were talking about social media, and it was so enlightening because I think people my age and older probably tend to think of social media in certain ways, but to hear young people talking about it, and they were particularly focused on how it gets a bad rap, and rightfully so in many ways, but also the community aspect and what you were just talking about, the ability to connect with other people who are maybe going through similar struggles with you. And they were even getting into like specifics about how to train the algorithm instead of the algorithm training you so that you're getting more positive things in your feed and things like that. I would just be curious, you've probably had a front row seat to kind of how social media and online conversations around this have shifted. What are you seeing from the time you started to now?
Yes. In fact, there's just so many areas of behavioral health where you could say, oh, really scary times. Look at all of this change. Of course, social media, how that's proliferated these last many years. But the reality is this is a major opportunity to lean into these new changes. I think especially parents will struggle if they say, completely social media is evil. We want nothing to do with it, because that just brings on that many more challenges for young people when all of their friends are online and will create extra isolation for them. So it really is a balance. It's learning how these technologies work, teaching young people what they should be aware of as they engage in these various tools, and making the most of it. There are so many positive accounts, for example, on many of these platforms. Yes, bad ones, of course, too, but we have to have an open mind because they're not going away anytime soon.
Right.
And kind of going off of that, I feel like the benefits in healthcare spaces, including behavioral health, it's a pretty volatile, unpredictable space. You never really know what direction it's going to go in. Like you just said, it changes over the years. What are you watching right now in this space?
I think, of course, the pandemic, I have to bring it up because the reality is it's really created some permanent change, I believe, in the next generation, especially expecting specialized behavioral health supports as part of their benefits. Stigma is reducing. Employees are talking more about their mental health, especially the next generations, at least certainly mild to moderate anxiety and depression. Of course, still quite a bit of stigma around addiction, SMI as well. But times have changed, and I think for good. And so there is that expectation that benefits leaders will invest continually in these kinds of services.
Well, speaking of those benefits leaders, obviously a lot of our listeners and our audience are made up of all kinds of benefits professionals, many of whom work every day with both employers and employees. So obviously there's the consumer angle and the parental angle, which is very important. But what advice and strategies would you offer around behavioral health to benefits advisors or HR professionals or some of the business leaders out there when it comes to employee benefits or just mental health in the workplace?
I'd say, especially once a benefits leader has done their research and built a portfolio of high quality solutions. Of course, it will be a portfolio. I think it's important to keep in mind that no one solution is going to be one size fits all and address so many issues all in one. It will be an array of solutions in a portfolio. But then what? It's really important that benefits leaders can coach their teams to make sure that they're leveraging said solutions. Now, engagement in behavioral health continues to be a huge issue, but I think it all comes down to, especially in the workplace, there should be a comm strategy for peers, managers, and executive leaders. If an employee is going to feel comfortable raising their hand to seek out and use the behavioral health solutions that the employer has already invested in, they need to be able to see their peers talking about their mental health in the workplace. They need to see that their manager is comfortable talking about mental health in the workplace. And then finally, from the top as well, leadership should also make it a regular piece of their communications company wide that it's okay to get help and to seek out services. And I do think all three of those are critically important if people are going to feel comfortable seeking out services.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I would just be curious to hear your thoughts on if and how much you feel like that is starting to shift, because I got the chance to meet Julie Krause, who's the director of global wellness at Microsoft. We spoke on a panel together at your conference. And I remember chatting with her a little bit, and she was telling me, I don't remember the exact years, but it was within maybe the last 5 or 10 years, even at a company as big as Microsoft, the number of HR and staff members who were kind of focused on the idea of wellness in general, not even behavioral health, but just wellness in general, was minuscule for a company of that size. And she had told me that now it's starting to ramp up. And some of what you were talking about, the conversations are starting, the stigma is starting to be reduced. But are you still seeing big struggles in that area, or do you feel like it's starting to shift for employers where it's becoming more of a central focus?
Right. Yes, there's still so much work to be done. I think it depends. Where's the company? What's the population of the workforce? I've lived here in Silicon Valley for a number of years, and of course, we've got pioneering tech companies with younger population. It's going to be different than, say, a manufacturing union in the Midwest. And I do think it depends on the population of the workforce. But I too am surprised that there still needs to be this much conversation in the workplace about it, because the stigma is real and it's challenging.
I think calling out the stigma is so important because, as someone a part of the younger generation, it's so normal for us to talk about. But when I talked to at the beginning of it, or I guess the beginning of like my mental health journey, when I talked to my parents about it, they wanted nothing to do with it. They didn't want to talk about it. And so I think seeing this grow in the workplace is so important and so special. And I think this is mental health is a heavy topic, right? So, how do you balance the importance of this work and calling out the problems that you see every day while also trying to remain positive and inspirational with the people that you work with in the mental health space?
Yes, I can relate to that conversation a lot with family members. And it does bring up that I'm hopeful with how much work has been done these last few years about cultural sensitivity. And it's been in conversations with many of these vendors at our show, as well as employers. And I think we need to continue that. Although, of course, with policy changes, lots of folks are figuring out how to navigate it. But at the end of the day, culturally sensitive solutions that are tailored to the specific populations that they're developed for creates better outcomes, period. It's just better healthcare. But to answer your question, on one hand, there has been so much progress. So it does make me feel that the work that we do and other advocates does, in fact, create change. And so I'm hopeful as a result of that. But at the same time, I do think it's important that we lean into the issues and problems that we're continuing to see in this space, as well as new ones that are arising, because it energizes me. At the end of the day, my hope for behavioral health tech was to bring the top barriers to expanding quality access to behavioral health at the forefront, and then showcasing the various stakeholders who already are starting to create solutions for them so that the rest of the community can learn from it.
Now, that's a perfect segue into what I was going to ask you next. So whenever I do attend, behavioral health tech, I'm always so amazed and impressed by all the excitement and energy, whether it's, on the floor of the exhibit hall or in all the sessions. There's such a diverse, young, energetic audience. And I would just be curious to hear your thoughts on how other industries, I mean, in the healthcare space, but a lot of the employee benefit space, for example, is a little bit older, and traditionally has not been especially diverse. How do you think industries like ours can kind of continue to bring in young, smart, diverse talent like we see at your conference and kind of keep the energy that's building going into the next generation?
As I mentioned, the next generation is ready to talk about mental health. They're passionate about making change. And I think if industries who are interested in attracting those employees, they need to invest the resources and give them the platform to be leaders and make these changes. They already are the leaders. And so As long as they know that they have the executive support, that actual resources are being put behind their ideas and suggestions, I think that's really the most critical piece if there's going to be sustained retention of this next generation.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And you hear so much about how the younger generations, yes, they're there for the paycheck. We all need to, pay the bills, but a lot of it is about trying to address issues that are near and dear to their hearts or to try to make the world a better place. And it's easy to kind of scoff and say that that's idealistic, but I think that really that is one of the most exciting things that I get out of conversations with the younger people that I meet at your conference and in ours is just that energy. So I think, like you said, it's really important to provide a platform for them. Is there anything else that you would say? Because I guess for behavioral health tech, the technology aspect is obviously appealing to younger people, and obviously too the behavioral health side, like you said, is coming up more and more in conversations with young people. But what about in industries like insurance, employee benefits? That's not necessarily the sexiest topic on the surface, but do you think it's kind of leaning into some of those same aspects that have resonated in your audience that would help draw more people?
Yeah, and I just agree so much because people are passionate about this topic. What kind of health or any kind of improvement can we make if we don't have our mental health intact? And so folks get really passionate about the topic and they're aware if they don't have the right resources to execute. But in the example you offered, like insurance, I think folks in those industries, if they can do a good job of demonstrating how important they are to this ecosystem, perhaps there's more of an awareness campaign that can be done for them in this next generation to know that, hey, look, if you're in a role here at an insurance company or a payer, like, look what kind of change you can make in leading the way for, let's say, adopting a novel solution and paying for it and disseminating it. I think that would be extremely powerful.
I love that idea. Again, at your conference, I've seen the Ad Council, for example, and some other speakers who are so good at tailoring their messaging specifically to, in this case, young people, but to whatever audience they're trying to reach. So I agree with you. I think the idea of continuing to talk to people who are in the demographics and the age groups that you're trying to reach and not trying to do a one size fits all approach when you're reaching out to them is a great idea. So, yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Well, a big part of your platform and conference is providing opportunities for investors and entrepreneurs. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important in the healthcare space and the mental health space as well?
Yes. So both entrepreneurs and investors are such a critical component of especially our ecosystem. I mean, there really isn't any scalable innovation without the entrepreneurs. And these are the people, especially who have lived experience that know firsthand this is what I need, this is what I can do to solve major pain points in my life. And of course, if there are something like 1 in 5 people in the country who are also experiencing it, imagine the powerful change. And then at the same time, investors, they're the ones that are supporting the scale. Thankfully, it's easier than ever to be able to build an app today compared to a decade ago. And of course, AI has only made that so much easier. But things like funding the marketing, distribution in healthcare, all of these sorts of things take resources. And that's where investors play a really critical role.
I think that's a great point. But I do know that some people, in the benefits and healthcare industry are a little bit concerned as more private equity investors and outside money continues to kind of flow into the healthcare space. Obviously, there's plenty of positives, but I think that there are also some concerns about that for various reasons. Do you have any thoughts on that? I'm sure you've heard about that kind of push and pull between the positives and the potential negatives. I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything about that, just the potential repercussions or why maybe you think that that's a little bit overblown or not something to worry about.
Oh, yeah, sure, of course. The temptation for replacing humans with tech has been applied in every industry with AI lately. And of course, behavioral health is no different. At the end of the day, I personally, when I look at the spectrum of innovation, on one hand, You've got just like regular old teletherapy, to putting one-on-one therapy online, basically. On the other end of the spectrum, we have like totally Jetson AI and the humans are totally removed. I believe that we're still looking at somewhere in the middle as the sweet spot for the best outcomes. Tech can be an extension of providers, but at the end of the day, people heal in relationship. And so these are the things that I would say benefits leaders need to be aware of and staying abreast of what is the evidence base today. And they'll be able to evaluate vendors, even those that have taken on PE funding. Like, are the outcomes there? Are the best practices there? And I think they should take that approach with established groups in those situations in the same way as they would early stage startups, of which there are just thousands of apps online like that, but it doesn't mean that they're all good.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think what you just mentioned is a really important thing for benefits advisors and other people in our audience. Just dealing with the noise. I think that's part of where the pushback comes from is it's great to hear about all these tools, but you go to a conference and the hall is flooded with all these companies that many times you've never heard of them before and you're hoping they'll still be around the next year. So I think what you just said is really important. The idea of doing your due diligence, talking to your peers, making sure that the people that you're potentially working with have kind of passed some tests or at least have come with recommendations from people you trust. So I think that's great. I mean, you talked about everything from telehealth to Jetsons level technology. Since you're right in the middle of all this, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Any cool things that you've seen lately? Just any new apps, any new tools that have specifically caught your eye?
Yeah, I'm just amazed at what's possible with AI. And of course, I can't answer that question without integrating AI. There was one solution I saw recently. They were focused on chronic disease, especially the impact of behavioral together with many chronic conditions. And with their app, I was able to just look at the screen and it was scanning my vitals right there on the spot. No need for any other hardware. And then at the same time, a second later, I was asked to speak a few sentences. And from that alone, it was able to detect more things like at risk for Alzheimer's. It was just incredible.
Wow, that is amazing.
Well, like many of our guests, you obviously spend a ton of time presenting innovative and disruptive ideas, and clearly it's a main part of your work. And we've kind of chatted about this a little bit about willingness to change, but kind of diving deep into it, how much do you think people's willingness to change has shifted over the past few years?
I think people's willingness to change has shifted because they're realizing they absolutely have to. If they're going to stay relevant, if they're going to retain the workforce that they want or the clients that they want. One example is a lot of traditional brick and mortar providers feel their market share is being taken from a lot of these innovative virtual companies and digital health startups. And they've had to face the decision of we can either avoid technology altogether or they can lean into it and develop partnerships and grow in this new world. And so it's competitive, but if they want to continue to succeed, it's a requirement today.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we talk a lot with all of our guests about how, despite the growing optimism and excitement about many of the ways in which the healthcare space is changing, the day to day reality of creating change for someone like yourself and many of the people we talk to, let's be real, it's grueling, it's tough. Sometimes you're getting rejected or you're getting pushback and all that. So, how do you stay motivated and not get discouraged or intimidated while you're trying to create these big changes within an industry that isn't always open to them?
Yeah, it's easy to get discouraged, but I would say I'm more motivated than ever to seek out and scout those use cases where different stakeholders are, in fact, having success in a new world, whether that be adopting various technologies or maybe the innovation is not tech at all. Maybe it's a new payment model or a new clinical methodology. Those are the use cases that I'm eager to continue finding so that we can present them to a broader audience to adopt. And that really, it continues to motivate me since we've started.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's important to stay motivated in this industry because it's an important industry to keep going, you know? Well, we talked about this a little bit earlier about your career path, but can you share a little bit more about that path and also your personal evolution that helped shape your current mindset?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, starting a large community and an event is, I'd say, definitely the worst business for someone with anxiety. And a few years in, I'm not sure I'd change my answer to that. So at
As,
least I can say it keeps me very close to the mission.
I was just going to say, as somebody who we've talked about this, being on stage is not my favorite thing. I think we can bond over that for sure.
Exactly.
Well, I also have anxiety, so I completely understand, where you're coming from, but it's also, important to fight that good fight. Can you talk a little bit about then, has stage presence gotten easier? Paul and I have chatted. It has gotten easier for him over the years, strictly because he just has to get on stage. So can you chat a little bit about, how you've changed as a person from where you started, and how does that kind of impact, your interactions with others or even at, your event?
Yeah, there's nothing like going to 40 events in a year like I did last year to provide some good exposure therapy. So
Wow.
that is, of course, an important piece of it. But I'd say, as I think about it, over time, I have just grown more accepting of my own journey and my own challenges. It's easy for me to fall into, wow, I've been in this space for how long and I still can't manage my anxiety. But I've grown more comfortable with it as I've gotten older. And I think that's really important. And before that sense of shame, shall I say, prohibited me from developing relationships with people in my community. But as I remind myself, everyone has strengths and weaknesses. And for me, I may always have a tendency toward obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety. But at the end of the day, it's what have I done with it? And I've channeled that to help others. And I think as I continue to remind myself, it's helped me. It's helped me embrace where I've been and helps me to continue doing the work.
I love that. And for anybody who has ever seen Salome on stage, either at our conference or at one of hers, you'll agree with me that you would never guess in a million years that you have those anxiety struggles on stage because you're a rock star. You're always lighting up the room and commanding respect and everything. So for whatever it's worth, I mean, it does not come across at all. And I've been always so impressed with, your presence at the show, whether on stage or just talking to attendees.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So, we touched on this a little bit, but the industry, and when I say the industry, I mean employee benefits in particular, has been historically very stodgy and reluctant to change. That goes for most of the insurance industry. I know as part of your conference and part of your work, you do more and more focus on the benefits side and kind of integrating that with the tech and with some of these other healthcare startups and things like that. In your interactions with benefits advisors and HR leaders and things like that, do you feel like some of that reluctance to change and some of that, status quo from the past has been shifting? And if so, like, how do you think we can continue to keep that momentum going into the future?
Yeah, I'd say one trend that I've seen for the benefits leaders in our community, at least that have embraced change, is they have also done a really great job at including employees of different backgrounds in their process of reviewing, trying out, testing various behavioral health solutions. And it seems so simple, but it's amazing how often it doesn't happen still. And so that anecdotal, not a ton of data on numbers, but that just continues to be a theme that I see.
No, I think that's actually a really great point. It's something that, like you said, it seems like a no brainer, but talking to advisors and business leaders every day, I think it's surprisingly rare that when some of these big ideas are implemented, that they actually spend some time with the end user and the employee and the consumer and the family before it's integrated. So, no, I think that's a great example.
Okay, and before we move on to what Paul and I would consider the fun part, we're officially at our last question of the main part, and it's something we ask all of the people that come on the podcast. So, gear up, get ready. But we basically just have you finish this sentence. The thing that makes me most excited about the future of our industry is.
The youth. I know we talked about it a little before, but the youth are leading the charge when it comes to change. And even in my own personal experience, I don't know that I would be anywhere near what I'm doing now or in this industry had it not been for my experience as a young person and having enough supporting adults who were willing to guide me in supporting that dream. And it's amazing to see a lot of the participants in our youth mental health track, for example, who have done similar things and more. And so the youth is definitely my answer for that.
Nailed it. I agree with you completely. I love that. All right. Well, as Lily said, you're done with the tough part. Now it's all about you. So I know how much you love the spotlight, like we were just talking about. So this should be really easy, right?
Great.
Now, so as we touched on earlier, this industry can be pretty rough on people. And I know that your workload and your responsibilities are probably, in my view, daunting sometimes. So how do you find time to relax and refresh? What are some of the things you do just for fun?
Well, I definitely need more non productive hobbies. I've reflected recently. It's like, oh, let me go on a 10-mile run and that's my hobby. But I think I need to diversify a little. So right now it's still berries boot camp, working out, keeping my plants alive.
That's a
Those sorts
full-time
of,
job.
truly, I have way more than I'm willing to admit on this podcast.
I love that. So you have no chill, but you're working on it.
Exactly. Yes, that is the takeaway.
I love it.
Honestly, I think keeping your plants alive is the best chill you can have
True.
because I simply cannot take care of a plant to save my life. I just got gifted an orchid and it's still alive, but I'm scared. I just don't see this ending well for me. But yeah, I think that's cool that, keeping plants alive, that is a hobby, just so you know.
Those are hard too.
I don't know why someone looked at me and said, yes, she can do it. Because let me tell you, I cannot. But we'll see. This is trial and error. It'll work out.
There's going to be a period of time where they'll look beautiful and the flowers will be on there, and then they will no longer be on there, and then you'll just have like 4 leaves in a pot. And at that point, I think it's not time to blame yourself. That's just the life cycle of an orchid.
Yeah, I heard I'm supposed to keep it after everything falls off and it looks like I killed it. I technically didn't kill it yet, apparently. You're supposed to keep watering it and keep it going.
Yeah, that's the theory, but I will say my wife has been growing orchids for years and we've only had like one that's ever rebloomed. So I think there are also places where you can take them and kind of trade them in for a new one, and that might be the way to go. Get it into the hands of a professional.
Yeah, that's really good to know. Okay, well, we can move on to the next question. So Paul and I are really big book people, and if you let us, we will just talk and talk and talk. But since this is about you, we have to, gear it towards what you read. So is there a book related to, the mental health field or your job that you would recommend, or maybe just a book for fun?
Yeah, I'd say just because it's top of mind right now, we had Paris Hilton speak last year at our event, and I just gave a few more out as gifts to some partners recently, and of course read it before the conference, and really, really surprised and amazed how incredibly vulnerable and insightful that was. She talks about her experience going through residential treatment centers as a young person, and many people would not necessarily immediately think of Paris Hilton as a policy advocate for mental health, but after reading that book, I definitely would recommend it.
That's a great recommendation. I will admit, I was able to sit in on that keynote, and I went into it kind of like what you just described, like, I don't get the connection here. Why is Paris Hilton here? Because I didn't know any of her backstory. By the time I left that place, it had completely transformed the way that I thought about her. And man, her experiences were just so brutal. And the fact that she has used her platform to advocate for others and to kind of expose some of these serious issues that are happening is so impressive to me. So yeah, I'm going to add that one to my list for sure.
Right. Yes, the lived experience is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, the next one I'm going to do dealer's choice. So it's up to you. Any favorite podcasts, movies, or music albums that you've been listening to lately? Or you can touch on all 3 if you'd like.
Oh, man, this is tough because I'm so out of pop culture. But if I had...
This is a safe place. There's no judgments here.
Yeah.
If you mention something from 40 years ago, it's fine.
I would say, all of those answers would change over a 6-month period, but I have one solid, consistent one that has continued, and my poor team needs to hear every single time that we have any kind of intense working session, and that is Enya.
I love that.
Me
It's just
too.
like a total icon and category of her own.
That is, exactly. She is a perfect dancer. I have been listening to her off and on for decades, and no matter what you're feeling, she can always just make it better. So that's a great.
That's been the consistent one for like 2 decades.
Amazing. If I can just throw in a podcast that's related to our last conversation regarding houseplants. Now, there's actually a podcast that I love called Ologies with Allie Ward that my wife introduced me to. And she talks to different ologists, different experts in different fields every week. And she touches on a variety of topics. It's absolutely wonderful. A lot of it is obviously science-based, but she recently had a guy who specialized in houseplants. So I thought that might be a nice segue. So if anybody's looking for another podcast, or Solome, if you need a new one, Ologies.
I definitely need plant advice, so yes.
He was pretty encouraging. He just basically, I won't give it away, but he did not have a very precious view of it. Basically, try your best, and a lot of them are going to die. That was kind of his advice.
Oh, it's a cold world.
I know, it is.
Okay, so, you talk a lot about how much you travel, 40 shows last year. That's crazy, but also good for you. And then last year you left our expo and went straight to Europe for another conference.
Yes.
Do you travel at all for fun, or is it just conferences?
Right. Every year I say this is going to be the year of boundaries. And here we are, I think up to 28 already committed for 2025. But a lot of them are, of course, more opportunities for our community to connect. And so we've got partnerships with lots of groups, and of course have been grateful to be able to participate with Benefits Pro. And so that's the majority of it. But fun ones, I went to Costa Rica last year, and it was pretty wonderful.
I love that.
I have to say, talk about plant diversity.
Yeah, for sure.
That's amazing. And I should mention, Solome is nice enough. She's literally at a conference right now and took some time to chat with us. So
this is true. Yep.
Yeah, you're never not going somewhere. Anything fun that you said you're trying to create boundaries? Anything on the horizon? A trip a dream trip, or one that you actually have planned?
Ooh, a dream trip. That's a good one. You know what? New Zealand continues to be on the list every year. Just haven't made it happen.
I love it. Maybe you need to figure out if there's a conference down there and you can just, figure out a way to combine.
That would be the way to get me there, yes.
See, I'm working with you here. Awesome. Well, Solome, thank you so much. Like I said, I know you're so busy, and I really appreciate you taking the time today. Like I said, even at a conference to chat with us. It's always amazing to spend some time with you, and you've become one of my very favorite people in the industry. So it was great to chat with you and catch up with you a little bit today.
Thank you so much, Paul and Lily. So appreciate the opportunity.
For all of our listeners, please subscribe to Beyond Benefits with Benefits Pro anywhere you get your podcasts. And if you want to rate us, we'd love your feedback. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email me over at pwilson@benefitspro.com, or you can email Lily at lpeterson@alm.com.
And thank you to our producer, Zach. Join us again next time for a new episode of Beyond Benefits with Benefits Pro. Until then, thanks for listening.